Want to start recording? Just let me know when we've started. Oh no, someone has a really... We're good? Hi folks. Does anybody have a really bright flashlight? Bright flashlight, anybody? Would you please sit in the front row for me, bud? I don't mean to move you away from your beer or whatever you're drinking, but it would be helpful to hear this bit because I don't think people will see some of the things I'm going to demo. Hi everybody, my name is Adrian Crenshaw. This talk is Lockade, Locksport electronic games. This is a little project I've been playing around with. First of all, a little bit about me. I run OnGeek.com. You've seen most of this before if you've seen one of my talks. I have an interest in info education, but I don't know everything. I got people asking me questions about things I have no idea about. People think since I've been running a blog for like years and years that there's things I know about that I simply don't. Most of the people on my pen test team are far, far better than I am. Actually, I think pretty much every one of them is better than I am. But I have an interest in learning, so what people can teach me is cool. Also, I don't know everything. I'm just a geek with time on my hands. And I spend a lot of time doing Locksport stuff as of the last year. I'm also a senior information security consultant at TrustedSec. Give Dave a big thanks for letting me go to all the cons I go to record. By the way, I don't have this in the slide, but I also record a lot of hacker cons in case you don't know. And I'm also a co-founder of DerbyCon. Now, how many people have actually picked locks before out in the crowd? How many of you? Wow, then I will really briefly go over this particular section, since most of you all have apparently done it already. But I'm going to dive into my box of tricks and try not to give myself a hernia as I pick the thing up. Dumb as a box of locks, I think should be a new expression. All right, got that there, that there. Yeah, unfortunately this is a relatively demo-heavy talk, and I'm looking for something to illustrate the purpose. Let's see. Yeah, unfortunately, I was paying more attention to what video was getting recorded and not when my particular talk was. Small problem there. Okay. We're going to do a quick intro to how to pick locks for those people who don't know how to pick a lock, though. So, the ones we're going to be covering are going to be warded locks, pin tumbler locks, and wafer locks. There are other types, but these are going to be most of the ones you're going to encounter. Some pin tumblers are just, well, actually there's like dimple locks and also tubular locks, but essentially it's the same thing as a pin tumbler lock except for where they orient the pins. As far as, this is a question a lot of people ask, are lock picks legal? Check from state to state, it varies. In my state of Indiana, they have to show intent. Basically they have to show that you meant to break into some place, in which case it becomes an extra charge. Now in Tennessee, the direct reading of the law seems to indicate that it's illegal regardless unless you're a locksmith. So check your local laws. To my knowledge, in Ohio, it's completely legal to have them unless you're caught breaking into something, in which case it's an extra charge of burglary tools. But the way lockpicking works is you essentially are using imperfections in the lock to try to pick it. And we're going to talk about how different types of locks work. Now the first type of lock you might be interested in knowing about is what's known as a warded lock. Essentially, a warded lock has wards in it, little blocks that keep you from turning any old piece of metal in it. However, if you put the right piece of metal in it, you can turn it. Now, most wards are not oriented quite like this, and I do have some warded locks up here. I'm going to try to grab one out of this box of stuff. Yeah, here's a warded lock. Also, an awesome weapon if you want to, carry them around. Actually, no, that's not a warded lock. I know I have one in here. That's... yeah, that's a warded lock. Essentially, a warded lock has little things to keep you from turning any old piece of metal in it. However, there's certain skeleton keys that you can use in different warded locks to be able to open them. Now, if you ever wonder if something's a warded lock, flashlight, please. Yeah, all right. Sorry. You see how that keyway is jagged, looks kind of like Charlie Brown's shirt? Looking down in it, you don't see pins, you don't see flat wafers, so you have a good idea this is probably a warded lock. Now the way warded locks work, and I appreciate you being Spotlight, man, sorry to burden you with that. What's your name? Give Drew a round of applause. All right, the way a warded lock works is you just have to have the right kind of piece of metal that bypasses the wards. Well, luckily, there's a certain set that as long as the warded lock is big enough, this set here And by the way, Southern Specialties, South Ord, and several companies make one that's virtually identical. This set right here has gotten me into virtually every warded lock I've ever tried, except for ones that were too small, in which case there's something called a half diamond, which will get me in. Also, when on the topic of warded locks, on some of the really cheap ones, you can actually take the normal warded lock key, which, if I can find it here, I don't think I have one immediately there. Let me look in my pocket. If you look at a warded lock key, I was going to show you what one looked like. Actually, I think I had one on the previous screen, maybe. Yeah, see how that little key has these little cutout parts? Well, on some of the really cheap ones, you can actually grind all of this off except for the very tip, make it look like a penis, essentially, stick that in the lock, and turn it. But for some of the better ones, by the way, no warded lock is particularly good. Some of the better ones, all you have to do is find the right, essentially, skeleton key to be able to open them. So I believe either this one or the one smaller is the right one to pick this. That one seems a little too big. So let's try the other one. And essentially, it's just like working the key once you have the skeleton key. Or I should say, more accurately, it's a warded lock pick. But that's how warded lock picks work and how warded lock works. And I lost this, and something just, oh yeah, that's fine, you can turn it off. I got so used to it being on. You light up my life, man. All right. That's a warded lock. Now, wafer lock's a little bit different, quite a bit different actually. They work a little bit more like a pin tumbler lock. Essentially, you have these wafers that drop down into a channel unless the right key is inserted. If the right key is inserted, all these wafers get picked up out of the channel, and you can turn the lock. Now, by the way, these illustrations pretty much all come from Deviant Olem. Deviant's a cool guy, and he does a lot of work for the Locksport community. But I'm going to illustrate this slightly differently. I actually have a warded lock here. I can pick apart. Pick apart. I'm going to open this thing up. And here's how a warded lock works. All right. You see, if you look down its keyway, instead of seeing pins, which you'll see in the next example, you'll see more like little flat pieces. Sometimes you'll see little flat pieces on both sides. The way that works is, it goes in this housing that has a channel. You see those little channels? And if you look on the other side, inside the lock, let me get it oriented where you can see the wards. You see those little the little wafers popping down? Essentially, when you put the right key in, all right, let me see. See some of them get popped out of the way. Once you got the right key in, those pop out of the way, and you can actually turn it because it's no longer getting blocked by the channel. That kind of makes sense? Now, the way you normally pick one of these is it's not normally picking. You normally do something called raking. To truly single pin pick, I'll explain in a second, but raking is generally, well, who's familiar with finding software bugs by fuzzing? Basically throwing crap at a piece of an application, close to the expected data, but not quite, until it breaks, and then you analyze how it broke. Raking a lock is essentially similar to fuzzing. Basically, you're trying random patterns with different types of picks until you can hopefully open the lock. And I'm going to demonstrate some raking techniques here shortly. But that's a wafer lock, and you can see a lot of wafer locks out there on kitchen cabinets, desk drawers, that kind of thing. If you have one in someone's filing cabinet, more than likely, unless it's a higher security one, it's probably going to be a wafer lock. That comes up much later. Okay, next up, pin and tumbler lock. This is what most of your master locks, your padlocks are going to be, unless they're warded locks, and your door lock is more than likely a 5-pin pin tumbler lock. The way a pin tumbler lock works is those blue pins are what's known as driver pins. They touch the spring. Some people refer to them as top pins. This can be inaccurate because in some countries, they hang the lock upside down from our perspective. In America, most of the time, the driver pins are at the top of the stack. Doesn't have to be that way necessarily. You can hang a lock upside down from the American's perspective. So the blue ones are the driver pins. They touch the spring. The key pin, which is in red, touches the key. The way it works is, once you put in the proper key, everything lines up the shear line. You have a cylinder inside of a cylinder, and you can turn it. And when you turn it, it's going to operate the mechanisms behind it, like a little cam or something, and turn the lock, and you'll be able to open it. Now, if I was to illustrate that a little bit better, up close and personal, let me make sure I get the right one here. All right, there's these little transparent locks you can buy online, or I got this one at DEF CON. They're not much fun for learning to practice picking because they're unrealistic because you get to see the pins, but they're nice for illustrating this particular task. Let's say I put in the wrong key. All right, let me slide this bad boy in. This is the wrong key. Notice that the different pins are in it and they're all misaligned. Like some of the key pins have been pushed up above the shear line and you still can't turn it because they're blocking. However, if I put in just the right key, all of these line up and you can turn it. And that's how your door lock more than likely works unless you have an incredibly weird door lock. Most American door locks are going to be pin tumbler. Now, as far as actually being able to pick these, first of all, you got to find out what you did with your pick set. The way it works is you're using imperfections in the lock. I mean, you can probably make a perfect lock that has everything perfectly drilled down through it, but it's hard and it'd be expensive, and most people aren't going to spend, a few $100 for a really quality precision lock. And when they can spend $8 for something that generally works good and most people aren't going to be able to get through. So if we're going to pick, and I'm not going to pick this thing to completion because it's kind of difficult. To be honest with you, this one's a bit of a pain in the butt. What you do is, and if we get the focus to go, you try to find a pin that's binding. As you apply a little bit of tension, these holes through the top aren't going to be drilled perfectly. One should bind before the others. And you're probably not going to be able to see, because I can't even see what I'm doing right now. You try to find the one that binds, and then you try to get it to lock up above that lip. And then once that happens, you try to get the next one in line to lock up above that lip and be just above the shear line. And let me see if I can get this thing on camera. Like, I believe that one second from, well, if you're looking at it, I guess second from the right. From the left, from y'all's perspective. Am I right on that? It's so weird looking at stuff and it's not a mirror. Yeah, second from the right, I kind of got it bound up above the shear line. Now I'd have to do that for each one of them. That is what you're doing when you do single pin picking. You find the first one that binds, then you find the next one that binds, you find the next one that binds. I suck at single pin picking. I've gotten pretty good at raking the locks though. Raking the lock is basically where you go into the lock and you apply the lightest bit of tension and you just rake back and forth across the pins to eventually you open one or you embarrass yourself. I do a little bit of both sometimes. Now, this is a master lock, number 3. A lot of people recommend it as a practice lock because, well, it's super common, and generally these things are fairly easy to pick. You apply your tension tool in, you apply a slight bit of tension. The number one thing that people screw up when they try to pick a lock is usually they apply too much pressure. If you apply too much pressure, you're going to overset those pins, kind of like when I put the wrong key in, and then you can't turn the lock. So you just apply the slightest bit of pressure, and hopefully, if all works right, you'll be able to turn the lock and you're good to go. And I think I busted something in this when I was playing around with it earlier. Let me test something real quick. Oh no, it's still working. All right, I'm going to slide that back on there. Now, when it comes to lock picking, there's different types of picks, but my favorite is what's called a DeForest offset diamond. And I'm going to bring that back up again, sorry. It looks sort of like that, but there's all sorts of different picks that people use for different purposes. Most people, if they're going to do single pin picking, are probably going to use some sort of a normal hook, and there's different depths of hook as well. Did get it right? Yeah, that's a hook. Up in the dark, it's kind of hard. A lot of people use different types of rake. Like this is a Bogota style rake. Though I think technically, unless it's used as a double-ended tool, it's probably going to be considered a wave rake. See, that's another thing. Deviant Olem has a whole talk on what different people call different picks. But probably the most important thing to carry with you a lot of when you're going lock picking is a whole bunch of different tension tools. For instance, I have these TSA locks. The TSA locks are basically designed so that the person, the TSA agent, doesn't have to cut the lock to be able to get into your baggage. They use a special key that they have to open it. But any lock that's designed with a standard key to open it is going to be a shitty lock. And most of these are, well, total crap. But the one problem with picking them is a lot of times they have really small keyways, so you need a small tension tool. Now, people ask about how do you make a lock more secure if it's a pin tumbler lock. There's different ways of doing it. One of the ways of doing that is to use different types of security pins. Like this is a spool pin, looks like a spool, and when you're trying to lift it above that lip, there's an extra spot where it can set, and this makes it much more difficult. Generally, you only put a couple of these in a lock. You have to have, my understanding, one stack of pins that's just normal straight pins. Otherwise, the lock can get jammed up and misaligned. But you know, they might throw a few of these spool pins in to screw things up. There's also mushroom pins, work much the same way. This is a serrated pin. There's a way of picking these also, which I'm no good at, where you can kind of pick it once and then tell when there's a slight back motion and continue to pick it. You probably want to check out one of Defi and Olim's talks about that to figure it out. There's also something called lock bumping, which I don't want people to do on my games, but you essentially take a key that looks, sometimes referred to as 999 key. That depends on the type of key though. That's a depth. When you get keys, you can actually reproduce them by number. Oh, no cool thing, next time you buy a master lock at a hardware store, look in the back, you'll probably see like a 4-digit number, and you'll see another lock with the exact same 4-digit number on the back. That's its key code. You can reproduce it from that, so you see several locks that have exactly the same key. So see whoever buys that lock before you, and then they'll go get stuff out of the work shed. But it looks like this. Every pin is taken down to the lowest level, each one of the cuts, I should say, that the pin would normally touch. And what you do is you put this in the lock, you slam it in with a hammer, and apply a slight bit of tension. And by hammer, I don't mean like a big craftsman hammer. You usually use what's called a bump hammer. It might be a little rubber mallet, or pieces of wood on a piece of plastic that's commonly used. Ask the Lockpick Village guys, they probably have one around. But there's also lock bumping, which is a popular thing to do. Okay, that's the intro to lock picking for everybody who doesn't know how to pick locks. So let's talk a little bit about normal practice aids that people generally whip out whenever they start learning lock picking. One is a lock tower. And unfortunately, I think I left both my lock towers upstairs, but I don't really need them. Essentially, a lock tower looks like what you see here. If you go upstairs in the lockpick area, you'll notice one that has DerbyCon burnt into it. Essentially, you just have a tower of locks you can sit there and practice on. A lot of people carry around master lock number 3s. That's a good lock to practice on. I carry mine around on chains because, well, one, it's an easy way to carry a whole bunch of locks, and two, it's scary as hell. Then there's lock walls. Now, most lock walls like the ones I showed. This is one I'm working on, which we'll get here in a bit. But essentially, you just have a big board with a bunch of locks in it. Also, there's, of course, the transparent locks, and these things called progressives. And a progressive is essentially just a cylinder. They took the rest of the lock away. They have basically just a cylinder, and they'll put one pin in it, put 2 pins in one, put 3 pins in one of them, put 4 pins in one of them, and the more pins it has, the more difficult it's going to be. Generally, a master lock is a lot easier than a house lock because most master locks are going to be 4 pins. Most house locks are 5, some are 6. And there might be ones that are more exotic that have other ones. But you know, those are things most people end up practicing on. But here's my inspiration. My bromance of DOSMan there started, I think, in 2005, actually maybe 2004. I started up a video blog of sorts. He had a video blog of sorts, and he only lived 2 hours away from me, so we started talking a little bit. We met up at Freaknik 2005. And he's been designing lockpick games for way longer than I have. Originally, I wanted to do a co-presentation of this at DEF CON, but things kind of fell through. That one wasn't accepted, and he couldn't make it anyway. But he has a hackerspace called Blooming Labs up in Bloomington, Indiana. Well, up from my perspective. Over from y'all's, I guess. Over and down. And he has a couple websites out there on lockpicking contest systems. But here's some of the things he's created. One thing he created was essentially an ammo can bomb that has a countdown timer in it. And I think he even has, he one-ups me on this one, but I think he even has like a tamper thing in it, and if you vibrate it too much, it goes off. And at DerbyCon, he had a contest to see who could pick this thing the fastest and who had the most time left on it. And this inspired me a whole lot. He also had one that not only inspired me, but got me very drunk. It was called the Rubble Challenge. Essentially what it is, and don't ask me to explain all the rules to you, because I can't follow it, because I'm usually drinking while I'm playing the game. But you get points for every time you successfully pick a lock first. I think your time is figured in there too. Every time you successfully pick a lock, it pours you a drink. You get a point for drinking the drink. Everybody else who gets poured a shot also, they get a point for drinking the drink. The idea of the game is you could win either by taking the most drinks in the end, or by picking the locks the best. And you know, so it's an automated drinking system with lock picking. And he's got that all wigged up. Oh man, he has improvised vibration motors in it to kind of mess up your picking a little bit, or just signal when someone else I think is picked. He has an overvolted aquarium pump that to actually pump the booze out, and a bunch of tubing, and also this is a display board I think one of his buddies put together for timing. and basically it says, you know, who's won, how fast. You really can't read it up there, but it gives you the time for each person and how fast they were able to pick it. Now, here's things inspired me to do some of my own games, which we'll talk about here in a second. But I'll mention something called gamification for a second. Gamification, I'm going to go ahead and read the Wikipedia definition. Gamification is the use of game thinking and game mechanics in non-game context to engage users in solving problems. That's Wikipedia's definition. The way I think about gamification, though, is it can make learning more fun. People like scoring systems. People like knowing how well they're doing. How many people ever work out regularly? You keep logs to know whether or not you're making progress. It's kind of like that. To know if you're actually making progress, you've got to kind of record it. So scoring systems are cool. People like building up and seeing how they progress. Also, people are sometimes competitive. Like, if I have a particular lock game, and I can pick it in 6 minutes, and you can pick it in 3, you know, there's a bit of competition going on there. Also, games make things that might be kind of mundane more interesting. I personally think lock picking is cool anyway. I sit there at home watching TV and drinking mead and trying to pop locks. All right, so I decided I wanted to do something like what DOSMan did. I want to make my own games. And I wasn't sure if I could pull this off, so my original scope was I had limited tools. I aimed towards the cheap. That fell way fast, because I think I probably spent at least $500 on tools since I started doing this. Probably more like $1,000, which include locks and such. I wanted things that were simpler to code. I want to be a little bit more flashy than DOSMan, and I want to use crap I had laying around. What I did was, the first thing was an ammo can, which was very similar to his. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. This is my version of the ammo can game that he made. And if I can see it, you know what? Actually, I don't think we need a light for this one. Maybe not. I don't know if you can actually read it if I get the right depth away. Basically, I have a lock game. That thing blinds you also. Changing colors. And if you could actually see it, you would see that there is these little icons I made on an LCD screen to show whether or not a lock is locked or unlocked. And it gives you a timer. And the way this thing works is it does a countdown as you pick the lock. And the idea is to have as much time left on the clock as possible. So let me go ahead and lock this one again. It's restarting the game. Oh man, that also got a lot better looking. All right, the game restarted. And it's hard for me to pick upside down probably. But we'll see how this works. Let's see. I touch it, it says it's locked, and then the symbol changes. And it shows me how long it's taken me, or how much time I have left on the clock to pick it. And I just have a bunch of locks inside here, and I'll talk about the switching mechanism. The hardest thing about making lock-picking games is trying to figure out a decent switching mechanism. Oh, I'll show the pick boy off here in a second. I think I have that much later on. Okay. The way this thing is wired up is fairly simple. I use something called cam locks. Cam locks are usually what you put in a desk drawer lock. Basically, it's a simple lock, you have a cam on it. Most of these are going to be wafer locks, and they're going to be really, really cheap. You can go to your local hardware store, though, and find them in, I think it's like cabinetry sometimes, or just general lock area. And they're also easy to mount, because you can generally drill a 3/4 inch hole and just mount them, unlike a door lock, which can be a little bit more difficult. I use a plastic ammo can for, I don't know, $5, $6 from Harbor Freight. A Tinsy, which is essentially a microcontroller. You can program it in the Arduino environment. Very nice, convenient, easy to use. All the source code, by the way, is on my website. I use plexiglass. By the way, plexiglass is a pain in the ass to cut and drill. So I eventually bought better tools to do that. I use that as my mounting plate. I use an I2C serial LCD as my screen, so I only have to use like, I think it was 4 lines, 2 for communication and 1 and 2 for power to be able to send anything I wanted to it, and a bunch of jumpers and beading wire. Beading wire is these things that like little girls' crafts where you put beads on a piece of wire. What I do is I scrape off all the insulation, or with a slight plastic covering, and I use it for wrapping everything together that I want grounded. It works well for that. And if I was to draw a diagram, normally there'd be a lot more locks in this. Essentially, the way the first one worked was I had the cam touch against a metal post, in this case a screw, that had neodymium magnets on it. Neodymium magnets are very strong, and so when it touches it, it doesn't bounce. It doesn't move on and off the contact point. It sticks to it. I also have some stuff in the code to debounce it as well. And I can read that whenever a lock goes grounded, that it is now closed. And then I can send a signal to the LCD screen and display whatever I want to display. And I can also change that RGB LED just for cool effect. There was one huge flaw with this original system of switching. Can anybody figure out what it is? Let me show you. There's a great way to cheat on this. I'm not sure if we're going to need it or not. We'll find out in a second. All right. Notice how it says only the first lock is locked. Actually, maybe do shine it. Maybe. Will that help? You know, one time I had it really perfect. All right, turn it off and see. All right. It is temperamental. Okay. Let's say I wanted to cheat, though. Since one's already grounded, I can touch one to the other. It's already grounded. And now it says I picked both lock 0 and lock 1. So that was a game flaw that I should have spotted earlier on. In newer games, I now, instead of having the lock go grounded, I have the lock already grounded, and it's a touch point that you have to touch that I read the input off of. So switching mechanisms. That's the switching mechanism I came up with. They're all also electronic switches that are pre-built. The problem with these is a lot of times they're really small, they're cheap, maybe too simple. They're really meant to just keep you from accidentally bumping into the electronic device and turning it on. There's better ones like Medico 3-pin electric one that DOSMan has, but I looked this up online and it was really expensive. I don't remember the exact price now, but way too much. So what I came up with was just using cam locks and that. And here's an example of some cam locks. I have a whole bunch of them. Essentially, you have this cam on the back, and when you turn the locking mechanism, it turns the cam and moves it out of the way of, let's say, the desk drawer or whatever, so you can actually open the desk drawer. And I really need to organize this crap. All right. But I'll probably need some help after the talk, moving it all out of the way of the next speaker, and then I'll move the rest of it up my stairs myself. Okay. But here's some cam locks. I'll show you. This one's kind of neat. It doesn't have a lock in itself. It's meant for using padlocks. But you can lock it, and it allows you to turn or not turn it. That's probably a more secure way of doing a desk drawer, because even a master lock is generally going to be better than most wafer-based cam locks. I also have some weird cam locks in here, though. I think I have another simple wafer lock. But remember how I mentioned that pin tumbler locks sometimes come in other configurations? This one right here is a tubular lock. It's essentially the same thing as a pin tumbler lock, but instead of having a straight line of pins, it's circular. And yes, they're all special picks for picking at, and actually in some ways they're easier to pick than normal pin tumbler locks. And I got another tubular down there. And over here I have what's called a cross lock. I think these things are more common in some Asian countries. But that's essentially a cam. And the idea is just to get that cam to turn and touch the touch point. And cams are nice and easy to mount relatively. There's a problem with that, though, especially when you're dealing with novice pickers. One of the biggest things a novice picker has a problem with is they apply too much tension. A friend of mine, his teacher gave him the analogy of pretend you have a pet ant and you really love this ant. And you don't want to kill this ant, but the ant has poison all around it, and you don't want to walk off into poison. So you've got to put just enough pressure on the top of the little ant's head so you don't crush him, but he doesn't walk into the poison either. Well, the problem is most novices are like, prying on it, and I can only drill round holes. And so what they end up doing is they turn the entire freaking lock instead of turning the cam. So there's something you can make called a double D hole. Laugh now if you want to. And essentially it's a 3/4 inch hole, but the sides are flat, so they're not all the way 3/4 out. But making these can be a little bit hard to drill. So the way I've found to do that is you can take a 5/8 drill and drill 2 holes, top to bottom. There's something called a Foster bit. If you look it up, I think I'm pronouncing that right. That's really good for drilling these. But basically you can drill 2 holes, one on top of the other, and sometimes get one out. You then have to dremel it out a little bit. There's also something called stabilizing plates, which are these metal plates you can use to mount the lock in and keep it from turning. Maybe glue that into whatever you've already drilled. That can get a little expensive. I've also done something called a hot punch. I call it a hot punch. I basically found me one of those plates, stabilizing plates. Then I shoved in like a 1/2 inch piece of copper tubing, heated it all up, and stretched it all out to fit the outside edge. And now, whenever I want to drill me a perfect hole, I just heat that thing cherry red. Well, it doesn't get cherry red, but I get it super hot and punch it through whatever I want to punch through, assuming it's plastic. And it works pretty well if you don't mind a little bit of nauseous fumes. But you know, what's a few brain cells between friends? Now, if you all have a laser cutter, and I've already put this pattern out there, I decided to make this game easier to reproduce. I made a pattern that seems to perfectly fit that particular Harbor Freight ammo can. And I have a bunch of double D holes already drilled in it. And you'll notice this little weird plate that I have here as well. The weird thing about this plate, the reason I have it is, is I wanted to have an easier way of making switching mechanisms. I've done ones where I've glued the magnet in or other oddities, but that's a little hit or miss. So I wanted to come up with something better than that. And what I came up with was to make out these extra little washers, which I'm hoping I actually have one with me in this bag or in some bag or another. Yeah, unfortunately this is a seriously prop-heavy talk to show things off, so let me there it is. Like a flock of seagulls. Okay, so I have these things. And you can get them out a little bit better. I think there was some problems with the temperature when DOSMan was cutting these things out for me. I don't personally have a laser cutter. I really want one. But I use these. And I've made them so that there's a hole in them that almost perfectly fits a certain type of neodymium you can buy. This little neodymium magnet. And you can put these washers on. You'd wrap a piece of wire around this, and if you had a cam lock, and I'm not going to be able to easily fit that over a cam lock, you fit that over a cam lock, put the cam on it, and then you have your new touch point, and it's all neatly contained. I've also done similar things by taking a PVC and stretching it out. Let me put that away for the time being. But if anybody has a laser cutter, how many of you have access to a laser cutter? Only one person. Great, I was going to try to get someone to make me some more of these washers. All right. There's one getting cut. Oh, right. Main board, of course, I use with the Tinsy. $16, fairly cheap. You can also use an Arduino knockoff if your project can be a little bit bigger. Other useful items, I use jumper wires because I always want to reuse my electronics. In reality, this game box I probably should have designed with soldered everything in because it's real easy to break. But it was meant to be kind of a demo unit. There's also different power supplies you can use for taking like 9 volts down to 5 volts. Some of these LCDs you can get for dirt cheap, $8, that's not too bad. And rare earth neodymium magnets, these particular ring ones are $8. I don't remember how much I've spent on like the 3x5 millimeter rectangular ones. And I've already covered the different kinds of lock types that are out there, so let me continue on. When you're sourcing parts, one thing you want to be careful of, especially when you're ordering electronics for Arduino, if you have a micro center nearby, it's nice to be able to reach, or fries for that matter, go out and just be able to buy the parts you want. I don't have one of those nearby. A lot of my stuff I have to order from China. It's cheaper, but you don't always know quite what you're getting. And always check out the website and the documentation to make sure that someone's figured out how to work it out in an Arduino before. Because I've received stuff and I'm like, okay, there's no way in hell I can actually get this to work, even though the advertisement kind of makes it look like I should be able to. So be careful what you buy. There's a time-money trade-off there also, because everything I order from China ends up taking forever and a day. I recommend looking at the pictures on eBay, Googling for those words that are on them, and see if anybody has gotten that particular model to work. Like that I2C backpack that's on the back of my LCDs, there's so many different versions of that you got to figure out whether or not the one you're ordering will actually work and if someone can give you workable code. Oh, also for cam locks, as mentioned before, most of them, a lot of them are designed for desk drawers. And most of them are going to be wafer locks, but most wafer locks suck. So you might have a pin tumbler lock. Well, there's a few pin tumbler locks you can go out there. If you want to go to your local hardware store, Lowe's has a couple of Gatehouse products with certain numbers. By the way, it's all even posted on my website if you want to go see the slides when I did the talk at OISF. Those part numbers have pins in them. And if you do things right, you can actually repin it and take out individual pins. There's like a strip you got to lift carefully, take out the pins and springs, put it back down. I think Primeline is a company that mostly sells through Home Depot. There's also National, this particular part number. And I've started ordering, Doug told me about some place called HL Flake. And I ordered these very cheap locks that have pin tumblers in them, that are cam locks. They're very well built, cheaper than I think what I got in the hardware store. I don't remember the exact price. And the nice thing about them is they come with both, well, I'll get to the next slide, a couple slides, I'll mention different. There's a clip and there's a nut. Essentially, you want your locks to have nuts. Now, padlock cams are also something you can buy. I'm going to use this so I can make padlock games. Number 3s are interesting locks to pick. They're fairly common to have at Locksport games. So I want to be able to score them. I can essentially turn one into a cam lock with one of these hasps. I've also found a way of doing much the same thing with a normal staple hasp. And what I do is I put a normally closed switch behind it and have it closed by the top of the hasp. Essentially, if I can bend over and get this, if you see the way this one works, let me see if I can, you might see this one. See how there's a little button behind it? Well, that button gets depressed by the latch, but it triggers when it's picked up. So that's another way of doing padlocks if you want to have a game involving padlocks. Oh, and cheap door locks. Some people turned me on to this here recently. Info sister, Amanda, she was one of the people that tweeted to me when I asked, where's a cheap place for locks? And she said, go to Habitat for Humanity's Restore, and you'll find old locks, usually without keys. But for all purposes, no keys, okay. And you can go out and buy these. You're probably not going to find cam locks these, but you can find old door locks. They might have paint on them, but you just use some acetone or something and get that off of there. And it's sell for dirt cheap, like $3 for an entire lock except for the key. Nifty. Am I running really low on time? Cool. But yeah, go check out Habitat for Humanity. When I was told about that, I was in Dayton last week, and I went out and got like 2 new locks then. Then I went to all the ones in Louisville and picked up, I don't know, maybe 9 more for fairly cheap. It's a great place to go. Tools to use. Originally I wanted to do this dirt cheap, but every time I had to buy more and more stuff. Pliers, wrenches, screwdrivers, all that. It's hard to cut a straight line, though, with a Dremel tool, to be honest with you. At least I'm having a problem doing it. I ended up buying a table saw eventually to do this. There's also a scroll saw, which you can kind of do some of the same stuff as a laser cutter, kind of, sort of, but much more a pain in the ass, and I have a hard time controlling the one I bought. Dremel tools are all useful for just about everything. Soldering iron for putting a lot of electronics together. There's a door installation kit, which is really nice. The first time me and DOSMan made a wall together, we ended up drilling the hole in the wrong spot. The way these kits work is you slap this on the side of whatever board you want, and it perfectly measures things out for you, and you just drill where the holes are, and you get out what you want from it. So it's a lot easier way to measure things out. Tools I wish I had was a 3D printer. Then I could make all these little closures myself. Like I'm going to show you the pick board here in a second, and that'd be nice. I also like a laser cutter, because there's also tools I can cut out with a laser cutter. And once again, straight edges, more of those little lock washers for the WD holes. I also want a fembot. So if anybody's working on one of those, get with me. I'll be an early investor. And next up, enclosures. All right, I made some improvised enclosures, but the ammo can is nice, but maybe you want something smaller. I found a few good project boxes online. The best one I found so far is from PackTech Enclosures. You'll see it right here, HPS 9VB. It has a little 9-volt compartment in the back of it. I believe that was the one I got. There's also this one from a different company, but it was a little too small for some of my purposes. But there's different enclosures out there. Nothing's quite perfect. If anybody finds a really good lock enclosure that has an LCD screen mount in it already, let me know. That brings me to the Pick Boy. The Pick Boy is essentially the same thing as this ammo can, which apparently I knocked over, except I have micronized everything. The insides of it, by the way, instead of using those washers, I hadn't come up with those yet, it's all super glued in there. It's kind of a spaghetti mess. But it's using neodymium magnets as touch points, and it works pretty much the same way as the ammo can. And because of lighting situation, you really can't read that. Oh, there he goes. Actually, turn off that light if you would, I think. Maybe. Oh, by the way, instead of using an RGB LED, I found a screen that has a backlight that you can change colors on. And it essentially does the same thing. It counts down, and you just got to sit there. And someone's already picked some of the locks and pick it. But it's just much more portable and nice. And I'll have this upstairs if anybody wants to play with it. By the way, just so you know, 2 pins. No, 1 pin, 2 pin, 3 pin, 4 pin, and a 2 in the middle of 5 pin. I was probably drunk when I made that decision to put them in like that, but that's how they're designed. If anybody wants to try playing it later. Oh, by the way, the colors keep changing faster and faster as it gets closer and closer to going kablooey. Okay. Oh, I almost dropped that. By the way, that enclosure, I'm not sure exactly how I cut the holes in that one. I think I dremeled and I had a lot of luck. When it comes to enclosures, measure 5 times and drill 3. I say that because I keep on screwing up enclosures and I come up with new ways to fix the enclosure and make it workable. So go slow, Dremel tool. Unfortunately, it's going to probably mostly melt plastic. Vices and workstations, something to lock your work into place is going to be helpful. Enclosures are expensive. Enclosures are more expensive than some electronics I put in them. Practice on scrap. I have a bunch of scrap PVC around and also a bunch of scrap plexiglass around. So I practice making my holes and see if I can get things just right. Also, when it comes to enclosures, aim for something larger than you need. I had a devil of time getting 6 locks in this thing. And find ways to keep shit from rattling around. Like I used all jumpers in the ammo can, but it's real easy for things to get jostled and thrown about. You can sometimes use foam inside to keep parts from moving. Though you want to make sure the parts that are supposed to move, like the backs of the cams, still keep functioning. I had some other enclosure ideas, but I haven't done a whole lot with these. Junction boxes from like hardware stores for electrical systems. These usually look kind of ugly. Shadow boxes, I found some discount like shadow boxes you're supposed to hang on the wall and use as extra shelves, but they're like look like little houses. I thought those would be great to drill into and make like a side-by-side game where 2 people can play against each other with locks. Plastic gutter pipe could probably work for some lockpick games. And there's something called Kydex, which is essentially the sheet that you can heat up with a heat gun and form around something else. And a lot of people use it for like knife and gun sheaths. I started coming up with better switching techniques. Now this is one you can use if you don't have a laser printer. Essentially what you do is you take a 1/2-inch piece of PVC, heat it up with a heat gun, slide it onto a cam lock that has a long shaft, and you get a perfect double D hole if you have a big shaft. You slide that in there while it's hot and let it cool off, and you move it back and forth, and basically you get something that'll lock in place. Then you can put a little contact point on it with another bent piece of PVC, or what I've done on some of mine is to put a neodymium magnet hanging off the back and have the cam touch it. But that's another way of making a switch. That's more of an example of how I've done it in some of my other games. This is the more refined version, but really it's only practical if you have a laser cutter. And by the way, I've contacted some companies to get my stuff cut. They won't contact me back. I don't know what the deal is. Oh, door switches. This is a work in progress. But I have found a way of doing a door switch, I think. Essentially, there's this type of switch that has a roller on it. If you slide that roller in right here, you can have this latch, this bolt, when it slides back, touch the roller, and read it as a switch. Now, the easier way to do this would be not to mount the whole deadbolt system in it and just mount the lock itself. But I like the whole ka-chunk thing. Like this is a lot nicer when you have that whole, well, the whole ka-chunk of it coming out. And I don't know if you'll be able to see this. This, by the way, is the next version of the pictorial computer. But it's serious work in progress. You might be able to make out that I have a little roller switch. Oh, no, you really can't. On the back of that, and it's basically just meant to be a touch point for when that latch comes back. But it looks like it's going to mostly function. Mostly. But if I said the line, they mostly come at night. Mostly. How many people actually get that? Okay, I'm dealing with a much younger crowd, I think. All right. That's another way of doing switching if you're going to do door locks. Now, this is the stuff I've built so far. I have some ideas that are works in progress. One of the things I originally wanted to do was make a lockpick tutorial computer. I wanted you to be able to walk up to a screen on an Android tablet, touch a picture, show you how to pick that lock, and have basically, when you pick that lock, have it send a signal that says that you picked it. And you can kind of, sort of do that. I'm going to cheat and not actually pick this. I actually have it set up where I can just use a touch point. Got to be able to see. Okay. And now I got to find a USB port that's open. By the way, this particular one, you notice how I screwed it up some? Originally it was all plastic, but then I put the holes in wrong. So I took this piece of wood that I got from Home Depot, I think maybe for free. Essentially, you can get the flooring stuff. It's really nice wood, but very small parts of it for free. And you can use that for filler when you screw something up. Also, I thought it made it look kind of like an Atari 2600. So I dug that. 5 minutes? All right, we'll cook through this. But essentially, I have a Tinsy in there, and a Tinsy can act as something that sends keystrokes. So I can basically pick a lock and have it send a keystroke that gets interpreted by an application. And it would play a certain video. Unfortunately, I found I couldn't quite do this with a web browser on Android yet. I'm going to have to make my own application. So, a work in progress. I found a different way of doing a pictorial computer. By the way, I call that thing the Pictoy just for the sake of it looking like an Atari 2600. That was how I was going to design the pictorial computer. A bit problematic there. Instead, I'm now using a Raspberry Pi for some of my stuff. And I've basically made a bunch of interactive videos. The videos aren't online yet, but the source code for this is. And the way the pictorial works is I have a bunch of buttons. Damn it, not enough space. I have buttons on here. You press a button, and it tells you how to pick a particular kind of lock. Now, I need to amplify that sound better, and I'm working more on this big stand-up version. Also, when you pick a lock, it congratulates you that you picked it. This will be on demo upstairs if anybody wants to play around with it. And essentially, that's just a Raspberry Pi and a lot of videos and reading from general I/O pins to signal what video to play. Ideas for the future. Oh, by the way, a lot of stuff I'm using whiteboard, so you can draw on it with a dry erase marker. I'm also using a rear view screen for my display, just because it's fairly cheap. This one I got a little bit more high-tech display, and it's a work in progress. And I'm going to cut through a lot of this because I don't have a lot of time. Oh, the screen I have in this new one currently, after I blew up the first thing I ordered from Seed Studio, I ordered something from Elenon, which seems to be working okay, but I don't have all the parts yet to fix it all up. Ideas I have for the future is some kind of competitive, lock game where you play against someone else, like Battleship kind of thing. Like I pick this lock, it has this reaction on your side. Tic-tac-toe, just because I thought the name was funny. Pick the locks in the right order to try to win the game. Rakes and Ladders, just because I like the name. Oh, the Breathalyzer game. I liked his Rumble challenge, and I'm going to end it with the Breathalyzer game pretty much. The Breathalyzer game was this. Essentially what I need is a Raspberry Pi, maybe just an Android tablet, some kind of camera that's going to be hooked to it, a bunch of locks, and a breathalyzer. Oh, and a servo that control the outpour of like vodka. The idea is you take a shot, you breathe into the breathalyzer. No, you take a shot, you pick a lock, you breathe into the breathalyzer. It takes the difficulty of the lock times your blood alcohol content, maybe divided by the amount of time it took. Then takes a photo of you with the webcam and posts it. There will be awards for, like most points and for silliest picture. If you have ideas, though, share them with me. That one's way down the pike. I got my notes page up already with a bunch of source code, maybe some more diagrams. Oh, if y'all can make it, DerbyCon's coming up, September 24th to 28th. Woo, yay, DerbyCon. And if there's any questions, find me around the con, because I got to get the hell off the stage.
Hey, Adrian, just tell everybody lunch is being prepared.
Lunch is being prepared. Oh, so it doesn't matter if I ran late. I just keep you all from lunch.
Yeah, you're good.
All right, we're good. If you have any questions, ask me at lunch. I'm going to try to get all my stuff back upstairs. Thank you.